I'm Michael Thompson, 34, a construction foreman who's been fighting for my daughter Emma for 3 years. When Sarah moved out, she laughed in my face and said I'd never get full custody because judges always favor mothers. She painted me as the unreliable ex-husband who worked too much, made too little, and couldn't possibly provide the stability a 7-year-old needed. For months, I believed her. I accepted weekend visits and every other holiday arrangements while watching my little girl grow more distant each time I dropped her off. Sarah's confidence never wavered. She had a college degree, a clean apartment, and what she called maternal instincts that no court would question. But Sarah underestimated one thing: a father's determination to protect his child. What I discovered about her secret life would flip everything upside down, and when that gavel finally came down, it wouldn't be Sarah laughing anymore. If you've ever felt powerless in the face of someone's manipulation, this story is for you. I still keep my wedding ring in the kitchen drawer, not because I'm holding on to false hope, but because it reminds me of the man I was when I believed love could conquer anything. Sarah Martinez caught my eye at a community college night class. She was studying business administration while I was there for construction management certification. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and when she looked at me, I felt like I could build her the world with my bare hands. Our wedding was small, held at the local church, with my construction crew as groomsmen and her college friends. As bridesmaids, Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, and I wore the only suit I owned. We couldn't afford a honeymoon, but we spent 3 days at a cabin my boss let us borrow, planning our future over instant coffee and gas station donuts. When Emma was born, everything felt perfect. Sarah would bring her to job sites during lunch breaks, and the guys would tease me about being wrapped around my daughter's tiny finger. Emma had Sarah's dark eyes and my stubborn chin, and watching her sleep in Sarah's arms made every 16-hour workday worth it. But perfection has a way of cracking under pressure. Sarah finished her degree when Emma was 2, and suddenly our small apartment felt too small, my paycheck too thin, my dreams too ordinary. She'd browse real estate websites, showing me houses we couldn't afford, talking about neighborhoods where successful people lived. She started comparing me to her classmates' husbands, lawyers, accountants, men who wore suits to work instead of hard hats. Michael, don't you want more than this? She'd asked, gesturing around our cramped living room where Emma's toys competed with laundry baskets for space. Don't you want Emma to have better? The question stung because of course I wanted more. I wanted Emma to have her own bedroom, Sarah to have the kitchen she dreamed about, and enough money in the bank to not panic when the truck needed repairs. But I also knew that construction work was honest work, that my crew depended on me, and that building something with your hands had its own kind of honor. Sarah didn't see it that way. She saw a man who left for work at dawn covered in sawdust, and came home exhausted, smelling like sweat and lumber. She saw a future where she'd be explaining to Emma's friends why Daddy didn't wear a tie to work, why we lived in a rental instead of owning our home, why we shopped at discount stores instead of the mall. The fights started small comments about my work boots by the door, sighs when I'd fall asleep during late-night movies, suggestions that maybe I should look into management opportunities that would get me off the job site. But they grew bigger, louder, more frequent. Sarah wanted me to be someone I wasn't, and I wanted her to love the man I was. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, and I found it crumpled in the trash can after Sarah had already seen it. She'd tried to hide it, but the evidence was there: torn edges, coffee stains, and the red stamp that sealed our fate. We were 60 days behind on rent, and I had no idea how we'd gotten so far underwater. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, smoothing out the wrinkled paper on our kitchen table. Emma was at daycare, and the apartment felt hollow without her laughter filling the spaces between our tension. Sarah stood by the window, her back to me, arms crossed. Because I knew you'd panic. I knew you'd start talking about picking up extra shifts or selling the truck, and I'm tired of living like we're one paycheck away from disaster. We are one paycheck away from disaster, I said, my voice rising. Despite my efforts to stay calm, Sarah, this is serious. We could lose our home. She turned then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, but disgust. This isn't a home, Michael. It's a place where we're stuck, where we're going nowhere, where our daughter is growing up thinking this is all there is. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been working 60-hour weeks, coming home bone-tired and covered in dust, telling myself it was all for them. I'd missed Emma's first steps because I was pulling overtime on a hospital renovation. I'd skipped my own birthday dinner because a client needed an emergency repair. Everything I did was for my family, and somehow it still wasn't enough. I'm trying, Sarah. I'm trying as hard as I can. That's the problem, she said, and her voice was cold now, clinical. You're as hard as you can isn't enough. It's never going to be enough. I can't raise Emma in this chaos. Michael, I can't pretend that love is enough when we can't even pay our bills. The fight that followed was brutal. Sarah laid out every disappointment, every moment she'd felt embarrassed by our circumstances, every dream she'd had to abandon because of my limitations. I fought back with my own grievances, her spending habits, her constant criticism, her inability to appreciate what we did have. You know what? Sarah said finally, her voice deadly quiet. I'm done. I'm done pretending this is working. I'm done making excuses for why we can't have nice things. Why I can't invite my friends over. Why Emma has to wear hand-me-downs to school. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm leaving. I'm taking Emma, and I'm leaving. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, and I felt something inside me collapse. Sarah, please, we can figure this out. I'll get a second job. I'll do whatever it takes. She was already moving toward the bedroom, pulling a suitcase from the closet. You don't get it? Michael, I don't want you to get a second job. I don't want to figure this out. I want out. When Emma came home from daycare that afternoon, Sarah was gone. She'd packed her things, and Emma's things, and left a note on the kitchen counter. I'll call you about visitation. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I sat in our empty apartment, holding that eviction notice, and realized that losing my home was nothing compared to losing my daughter. Emma's drawing hangs on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a hammer that she picked out herself. In crayon, she'd drawn a stick figure with a sad face standing in front of a tiny brown box. That's you, Daddy, she'd explained during one of our weekend visits. You look sad in your little house. The little house was a studio apartment above Mrs. Rodriguez's garage, the only place I could afford after Sarah left. It had one room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom the size of a closet. The pull-out couch became Emma's bed during her weekend stays, and I'd sleep on the floor, listening to her breathe and wondering how I'd gotten here. Those first custody exchanges were tortured. Sarah would pull up in her friend's car she'd moved in with her college roommate across town, and Emma would climb out, dragging her little backpack and looking confused. Sarah never got out of the car, never looked at me directly, just waited with the engine running while Emma and I navigated the awkward ritual of hello. Be good for Daddy, Sarah would say through the roll-down window, and there was something in her tone that made it sound like a warning rather than encouragement. Emma was 4 then, too young to understand why Mommy and Daddy didn't live together anymore, but old enough to sense that something fundamental had shifted in her world. She'd ask questions I couldn't answer. When is Mommy coming to see your house? And why don't you come to Mommy's house anymore? I tried to make our weekend special, but my budget was limited, and a studio apartment didn't offer much entertainment for an active 4-year-old. We'd go to the park, visit the library, or walk through the grocery store where Emma would point out things she wanted and I'd explain why we couldn't get them right now. Mommy says you don't have enough money, Emma said one Saturday morning, standing in front of the toy aisle at Target. She was looking at a dollhouse that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah was already poisoning Emma's mind against me, making her see me as the parent who couldn't provide, who had to say no, who lived in a tiny apartment instead of a real house. Daddy works very hard, I told Emma, kneeling down to her level. Sometimes grown-ups have to make choices about how to spend money, but you know what? I choose to spend my money on things that matter most, like time with you. Emma nodded seriously, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. At 4, she couldn't understand concepts like budgets or priorities. She just knew that Mommy's house had her own bedroom and a backyard, while Daddy's house was one room where she slept on a couch. The hardest part was Sunday evenings. Emma would get quiet as the day wore on, sensing that our time together was ending. She'd cling to me a little tighter, ask if she could stay just one more night, and I'd have to explain that she needed to go back to Mommy's house for school. I wish you and Mommy lived together, she'd whisper into my shoulder during our goodbye hugs, and I'd feel my heart break all over again. Sarah would be waiting in the car, checking her phone, impatient to get Emma home and get on with her life. The exchanges became more tense as weeks passed, with Sarah making subtle comments about my appearance, my apartment, my ability to care for Emma properly. She seems tired, Sarah would say, eyeing Emma's rumpled clothes or messy hair. Maybe baths aren't optional. Michael, she had a bath, I'd reply, but Sarah was already pulling away. Emma's face pressed against the back window, waving goodbye until they disappeared around the corner. Those Sunday nights were the loneliest of my life. I'd sit in my empty apartment, looking at Emma's drawing on the refrigerator, and wonder if I was failing her, if Sarah was right. If love really wasn't enough, the stack of court documents felt heavier than any load of lumber I'd ever carried. Page after page of legal language, forms to fill out, deadlines to meet, and fees I couldn't afford. Sarah had hired Catherine Walsh, a sharp-dressed family law attorney who charged more per hour than I made in a day. I had legal aid, and an overworked public defender named Tom Martinez who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Let me be straight with you, Michael, Tom said during our first meeting, his tie loosened and his desk covered with case files. Custody battles are uphill fights for fathers, especially when the mother appears stable and the father is struggling financially. I shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair across from his desk. Through the window, I could see the courthouse where my fate and Emma's would be decided. What about the fact that Sarah left? Doesn't that count for something? Tom flipped through my file, shaking his head. She left an unhealthy living situation. The eviction notice, the financial instability, the cramped apartment from the court's perspective. She was protecting her child. Protecting her child. The words came out harsher than I intended. I'm her father, I love Emma more than anything in this world. I know you do, but love doesn't pay rent. Michael, love doesn't provide stability. And right now, on paper, Sarah looks like the responsible parent. He spread out Sarah's legal filing across his desk, and I saw my life reduced to bullet points and legal arguments, unemployed periods when construction slowed down, the eviction notice, my current living situation, even my work schedule was painted as a negative. How could I provide proper supervision for a child when I worked such long hours? What about Sarah's work situation? I asked. She's working part-time at a retail store. How is that more stable than my job? Tom made a note. She's also taking online classes to finish her master's degree. The court sees that as self-improvement, working toward a better future for the child. Everything was twisted, viewed through a lens that made Sarah look like the victim and me look like the problem. The court filing painted her as a young mother who'd made the difficult decision to leave an unstable home environment to provide better opportunities for her daughter. I was portrayed as an unreliable provider who couldn't maintain steady housing or income. What are my chances? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Tom leaned back in his chair, studying me. Honestly, not good. Best case scenario, you'll get standard visitation every other weekend, maybe one weeknight, alternating holidays. Sarah will get primary custody, child support, and the right to make major decisions about Emma's education, healthcare, and activities. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. That's it. That's all I get. That's how the system works. Michael, courts favor stability, and right now, Sarah appears to be the more stable parent. I left that meeting feeling defeated before the battle had even begun. Sarah had every advantage: a better lawyer, a cleaner living situation, and a court system that seemed predisposed to favor mothers. I was fighting with one hand tied behind my back, and everyone knew it. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which gave me just enough time to worry myself sick about losing Emma forever. I threw myself into work, picking up every available overtime shift, trying to save money for a better apartment, a better lawyer, a better chance at keeping my daughter in my life. But late at night, alone in my studio apartment, I'd look at those court documents and wonder if I was kidding myself. Sarah had said I'd never get full custody, and looking at the evidence stacked against me, I was starting to believe she was right. The system wasn't designed for guys like me, guys who worked with their hands, who lived paycheck to paycheck, who measured success and completed projects rather than bank balances. The court wanted stability, and I was anything but stable. Still, I couldn't give up. Emma needed me, even if the court couldn't see it. She needed a father who would fight for her, who would show up for every hearing, who would prove that love might not pay the bills. But it was still the most important thing a parent could offer. Sarah's Instagram feed was a masterpiece of careful curation. I discovered it by accident when Emma mentioned something about mommy's phone pictures, and my curiosity got the better of me. What I found was a carefully constructed narrative of single motherhood that bore little resemblance to the woman I'd been married to. Photo after photo showed Sarah and Emma in perfectly staged moments, baking cookies in a spotless kitchen, reading bedtime stories in a bedroom decorated like something from a magazine, playing in a backyard that definitely wasn't her friend's rental house. The captions were worse than the images: inspirational quotes about choosing happiness and building the life you deserve, interspersed with humble bragging about Emma's accomplishments and Sarah's own journey of self-discovery. Single mama, life isn't easy, but watching this little angel thrive makes every sacrifice worth it. Read one post, accompanied by a photo of Emma in a brand new dress I'd never seen before. Another showed Sarah at what appeared to be a wine bar with friends, all of them dressed to the nines. Sometimes you need to remind yourself that you're not just a mom, you're a whole person with dreams and goals. Date night with my girls. The comments were exactly what Sarah was fishing for: dozens of heart emojis, supportive messages about her strength and resilience, and compliments about how blessed Emma was to have such a dedicated mother. Several people specifically mentioned how much better Sarah looked now, how she was glowing and living her best life. But the photos raised questions that gnawed at me. Where was Sarah getting the money for Emma's new clothes, for dinners, out, for what appeared to be a much nicer living situation than I'd expected? Her part-time retail job couldn't possibly support the lifestyle she was displaying online. When I picked Emma up the following weekend, I noticed she was wearing yet another outfit I'd never seen: a designer dress that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Her hair was styled in elaborate braids that must have taken hours to create, and she was carrying a new backpack covered in characters from some cartoon I didn't recognize. "Wow, Emma, you look beautiful," I said, genuinely meaning it but also trying to fish for information. "Is that a new dress?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Mommy bought it for me. She said I needed pretty clothes for pictures. Pictures. Mommy takes lots of pictures. She says we need to look nice because people are watching." The phrase sent a chill down my spine. Emma was 4 shades shouldn't be worried about looking nice for people who were watching, but Sarah was using her as a prop in her social media performance, teaching her that appearance mattered more than authenticity. As the weekend progressed, I noticed other changes in Emma. She was more concerned with keeping her clothes clean, more worried about her appearance, more focused on whether things looked right than whether they were fun. When we went to the park, she was reluctant to play on the equipment because she might get dirty. Mommy says I need to be a good girl, Emma explained when I encouraged her to go down the slide. Good girls don't get messy. This wasn't the carefree child I remembered. Sarah was molding Emma into the perfect accessory for her social media image, teaching her that love was conditional on behavior, that worth was measured by appearance, that being good meant being compliant and photogenic. The most disturbing discovery came when Emma accidentally mentioned Uncle David during one of our conversations. She'd never mentioned any uncle before, and when I asked about him, she got a secretive look on her face. Mommy says I'm not supposed to talk about Uncle David, Emma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He's Mommy's special friend. Sarah was dating someone, possibly living with someone, and hadn't mentioned it in any of the custody paperwork. She was presenting herself to the court as a single mother, focused solely on providing for Emma, while simultaneously maintaining a social life and relationship that she was keeping secret from me and from the legal system. Looking at those Instagram photos again, I began to notice details I'd missed before. The same man's hand reaching for food in several restaurant photos. A masculine shadow in the background of what was supposed to be a girls' day post. A second wine glass on the table. During what Sarah had captioned as a quiet night in with my angel, Sarah was living a double life. And I was the only one who seemed to notice. Emma's backpack was torn when I picked her up for our weekend visit in late September. It wasn't just worn, it was genuinely damaged, with one of the straps hanging by threads and a hole in the main compartment that had been hastily patched with duct tape. What happened to your backpack, sweetheart? I asked as I buckled her into my truck. Emma shrugged, suddenly interested in the zipper pull on her jacket. It broke. How did it break? I don't know. But her voice was small, uncertain, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. This was the same child who, just a few weekends ago, had been so concerned about keeping her clothes clean, so focused on looking perfect for her mother's photos. Now she was carrying a broken backpack and wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. As we drove to my apartment, I noticed other things. Emma was thinner than she'd been a month ago, her face more angular, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. When we stopped for lunch, she devoured her sandwich like she hadn't eaten in hours, and when I offered her apple slices, she stuffed them in her pockets for later. Emma, when was the last time you ate? She thought about it, seriously, her 4-year-old brain trying to process time. Yesterday? Maybe the day before yesterday. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, maybe the day before yesterday? Sometimes Mommy forgets to make breakfast, and sometimes there's no food in the refrigerator. But Uncle David brings pizza sometimes, and that's good. I kept my voice calm, but inside I was raging. Does Mommy forget to make dinner too? Emma nodded. She's really tired a lot. She sleeps during the day sometimes, and then she goes out at night with Uncle David. Mrs. Patterson watches me then. Mrs. Patterson was Sarah's elderly neighbor, a sweet woman who was probably in her 70s and had no business watching a 4-year-old regularly. But more concerning was the pattern Emma was describing. Sleeping during the day, going out at night, forgetting meals. That weekend, I watched Emma carefully. She hoarded food, tucking crackers and fruit into her pockets, even when I assured her there was plenty more. She was jumpy around loud noises, and she seemed genuinely surprised when I ran her a bath without being asked. Are you going to wash my hair? She asked, and there was something in her tone that made me look at her more closely. Of course, honey. When's the last time someone washed your hair? Emma's hair was greasy, tangled, and hadn't been properly cleaned in what looked like weeks. As I worked shampoo through the knots, I found myself getting angrier and angrier. This was the child Sarah was fighting to keep primary custody of. This was the superior parenting she was claiming to provide. Sunday night, when it was time to take Emma back to Sarah's, I almost couldn't do it. She clung to me at the door, her little arms wrapped around my neck, and whispered, "Can I stay here? Daddy, please." Sarah appeared in the doorway, and I was shocked by her appearance. She was thinner than I'd ever seen her, with dark circles under her eyes, and a jittery energy that made her seem like she was vibrating. Her pupils were dilated despite the bright porch light, and she kept checking her phone every few seconds. "You're late," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I have things to do. Things to do." I looked at Emma, who was now hiding behind my legs. "It's Sunday night, Sarah. What things could you possibly have to do? That's none of your business." "Michael, Emma, come on. We need to go." Emma shook her head, pressing closer to me. "I want to stay with Daddy." Something flickered across Sarah's face in frustration, maybe even fear. "Emma, stop being difficult. We have to go home." "This is home," Emma said in a small voice, and I saw Sarah's jaw clench. "No, it's not. This is Daddy's house. Our home is across town. Remember, where your bedroom is." But as I watched this exchange, I realized Emma was right. My tiny apartment felt more like home to her than whatever situation Sarah was providing. And looking at Sarah's appearance, her behavior, her obvious agitation about getting Emma back quickly, I started to suspect that I knew why. After they left, I sat in my apartment and made a decision. I couldn't keep sending Emma back to whatever was happening at Sarah's house. I couldn't keep pretending that the system would figure it out on its own. If I wanted to protect my daughter, I was going to have to investigate what was really going on in Sarah's perfect life. That night, I started documenting everything. Emma's appearance, her behavior, the things she said about her mother's schedule and habits. I took photos of her torn backpack, her dirty clothes, her obvious hunger. I wrote down every detail I could remember about Sarah's demeanor during the custody exchange. Something was very wrong, and I was going to find out what it was. The gas station receipt was crumpled in Emma's jacket pocket when I found it during laundry. At first I almost threw it away, just another piece of random trash that kids accumulate. But something made me smooth it out and look at it more carefully. Timestamp read 2:47 a.m. from a Shell station across town. The purchase was for energy drinks, cigarettes, and gas. What caught my attention wasn't just the time who takes a 4-year-old to a gas station at almost 3 a.m., but the location. The station was in a part of town I knew well from construction, jobs, an area where the bars stayed open late and the hotels rented rooms by the hour. I started paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. Emma often smelled like cigarette smoke when I picked her up. Despite Sarah claiming she didn't smoke, she had toys and snacks I'd never seen before. Cheap trinkets from gas stations and convenience stores. Not the kind of things a mother would buy during regular shopping trips. Emma, where did you get this? I asked, holding up a small stuffed animal that reeked of cigarette smoke. Uncle David bought it for me at the store, she said matter-of-factly. We were there really late. I was sleepy, but Mommy said I had to wait in the car. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. Sarah was taking Emma on late-night trips to questionable parts of town, leaving her alone in the car while she conducted some kind of business. The energy drinks suggested someone trying to stay awake, and the pattern of late-night activity followed by daytime sleeping was beginning to make sense. I decided to do some investigating on my own. That next Saturday, after Emma was asleep, on the pull-out couch, I drove to the address where Sarah was supposedly living. The house was dark, with no cars in the driveway and newspapers piled up on the front porch. Either Sarah had moved without updating her address with the court, or she'd never actually lived there at all. The next piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. I was having coffee with Jake Morrison, a guy from my construction crew, whose ex-wife had gone through her own custody battle. He was telling me about the private investigator he'd hired when Jake mentioned something that made my blood run cold. You know what the worst part was? Jake said. Finding out she was using drugs the whole time. All those months she was claiming I was the unfit parent. She was high. The pie got photos of her buying from some dealer outside a bar downtown. What kind of drugs? Pills, mostly. Prescription stuff she was getting illegally. Made her seem normal during the day, but she was completely strung out at night. The description fit Sarah's behavior perfectly: the dramatic weight loss, the jittery energy, the dilated pupils, the erratic sleep schedule. But it also explained the late-night trips, the gas station receipts, the way Emma had been looking. Increasingly neglected, I started researching drug activity in the area where I'd found that gas station receipt. Online forums and news reports painted a picture of a neighborhood where prescription drug dealing was common, where people could buy pills in parking lots and gas station bathrooms. The Shell station where Sarah had been at 2:47 a.m. was mentioned, specifically in several police reports about drug arrests. The more I learned, the more worried I became about Emma's safety. She was being dragged along on drug runs, left alone in cars in dangerous neighborhoods, exposed to people and situations that could put her at serious risk. And all while Sarah maintained her perfect social media image and fought for primary custody. I needed proof. The court wasn't going to take my word for it, especially not against Sarah's expensive lawyer and carefully constructed facade. I needed evidence that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. That's when I met Maria Santos at the courthouse. She was there for her own custody hearing, and we struck up a conversation in the hallway while waiting for our lawyers. Maria had been through a similar situation with her ex-husband, and she gave me advice that changed everything. Document everything, she said. Every missed meal, every dirty outfit, every strange story Emma tells you. Keep a journal with dates and times, take pictures. And if you really suspect drug use, you might want to consider hiring a private investigator. I can't afford a private investigator. Maria smiled grimly. You can't afford not to. Trust me, if Sarah is using drugs and you can prove it, this custody battle is over. But if you can't prove it, you'll be fighting this for years. That night, I looked at my savings account and made a decision that would either save my daughter or bankrupt me. I was going to hire a professional to find out what Sarah was really doing during those late-night trips. Emma deserved better than a mother who was too high to remember to feed her, and I deserved better than a system that would give custody to someone just because they looked good on paper. The manila envelope from Rodriguez Investigations sat on my kitchen table for 10 minutes before I had the courage to open it. I'd hired Carlos Rodriguez with the last of my savings, a wiry ex-cop who specialized in domestic cases and spoke with the kind of quiet authority that comes from seeing too much of humanity's dark side. You're not going to like what's in there. Carlos had warned me when he dropped it off. but it's everything you need. The first page was a police report dated 8 months ago, 2 months before Sarah had filed for divorce. Sarah Martinez had been arrested for possession of controlled substances, specifically OxyContin and Xanax without prescriptions. The charges had been reduced to a misdemeanor through some kind of plea bargain, and she'd received probation and community service. But there was more. A second arrest 3 years ago for shoplifting at a department store. Another report for writing bad checks. A pattern of small-time criminal activity that Sarah had somehow managed to hide during our entire marriage and throughout the custody proceedings. The photographs Carlos had taken were worse than the police reports. Sarah, meeting with a known drug dealer in the parking lot of that same Shell station where she'd bought gas at 2:47 a.m., Sarah leaving, Emma alone in the car while she conducted transactions with people who looked like they belonged in mugshots, Sarah appearing visibly intoxicated while driving with my daughter in the back seat. There were receipts showing she'd been using multiple pharmacies to obtain prescription drugs, a practice called doctor shopping that was both illegal and dangerous. Bank records showing large cash withdrawals that didn't correspond to any legitimate expenses. Text message screenshots where Sarah discussed drug purchases using coded language that fooled no one. The most damning evidence was a video Carlos had shot showing Sarah snorting what appeared to be crushed pills in a gas station bathroom while Emma waited in the car outside. The timestamp showed it was taken during what was supposed to be a custody weekend time, when Sarah was supposed to be providing stable, safe care for our daughter. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the evidence spread across my table, and felt sick. This was the woman who had convinced a judge that I was the unfit parent. This was the person who had been awarded primary custody of Emma. This was the mother who had looked me in the eye and said I'd never get full custody because the courts always favored mothers. But mixed with the revulsion was something else. Hope this was also the evidence that would change everything. I called Tom Martinez immediately, even though it was after 9 p.m. When I told him what I'd found, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Michael, are you absolutely sure about this? Because once we file this with the court, there's no going back. Sarah's going to know you've been investigating her, and she's going to fight dirty. Tom, she's been taking Emma on drug runs. She's been leaving her alone in cars, in dangerous neighborhoods. How much dirtier can this get? You'd be surprised. But you're right, this changes everything. Can you bring the evidence to my office first thing Monday morning? I spent the weekend in a strange state of suspended animation. Emma was with Sarah for the weekend, and knowing what I now knew about Sarah's activities, I could barely function. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be a call from the hospital or the police. Every hour that passed was another hour. My daughter was in danger. When I picked Emma up Sunday evening, Sarah seemed different, more paranoid, more agitated than usual. She kept looking over her shoulder and checking her phone, and when I asked if everything was okay, she snapped at me. Everything's fine, Michael. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any. But Emma's appearance told a different story. She was wearing the same clothes I'd dropped her off in on Friday, and they were dirty and wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Her hair was unbrushed and she had dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. How was your weekend, sweetheart? I asked as we drove away from Sarah's house. Okay, Emma said quietly. Mommy was really busy. We went to a lot of stores. Stores? That's what Sarah was calling the places where she bought drugs. In Emma's 4-year-old mind, those gas stations and parking lot meetings were just errands her mother had to run. That night, as I tucked Emma into the pull-out couch, she looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and said, "Daddy, I don't like it when Mommy gets sleepy medicine. It makes her act funny." Sleepy medicine? The white powder that makes her really happy and then really sleepy. She puts it on the mirror in the bathroom and then uses a straw to drink it through her nose. My heart broke and filled with rage at the same time. Emma had been watching her mother use drugs, had been trying to make sense of behavior that no child should have to witness, and she was describing it with the matter-of-fact tone of a kid who had seen it happen many times before. Emma, has Mommy ever asked you to keep secrets about the sleepy medicine? She nodded solemnly. She said if I told anyone, the police would take me away and I'd never see you or her again. Sarah had been using Emma's love and fear to keep her quiet about the drug use. She'd been manipulating a 4-year-old into becoming an accomplice to her crimes. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Tom Martinez spread the photographs across his desk like he was dealing cards, each image more damning than the last. Carlos Rodriguez had done his job well. The surveillance photos were clear, time-stamped, and undeniable. Sarah entering known drug houses, Sarah meeting with dealers, Sarah leaving Emma unattended in a car while she conducted illegal transactions. This is gold, Michael Thompson said, but his expression was serious. But we need to be strategic about how we present this. Sarah's lawyer is going to claim this is a setup, that you hired someone to harass and frame her. How can they claim it's a setup when there are police reports going back 3 years? They'll say the arrests were mistakes, that the charges were reduced because she was innocent, that you're using old information to destroy her character. Tom picked up one of the photos showing Sarah with white powder on a mirror. But this is recent, and it's criminal activity that directly endangers Emma. We spent the morning developing a strategy. First, we'd file an emergency motion for temporary custody, based on immediate danger to Emma. Then we'd request mandatory drug testing for both parents. Something I welcomed and Sarah would have to agree to or risk looking guilty. Finally, we'd present the evidence in a way that showed a pattern of behavior, not just isolated incidents. The key is Emma's testimony, Tom explained. She's young, but judges take children's statements seriously, especially when they're consistent with physical evidence. I don't want to put Emma through a traumatic court experience. We might not have to. Sometimes the threat of a child's testimony is enough to force a settlement. If Sarah knows Emma can describe her drug use in detail, she might agree to supervised visitation rather than risk a public hearing. But I underestimated Sarah's desperation and her lawyer's ruthlessness. That afternoon, Carlos called with urgent news. Michael, you need to know Sarah hired a private investigator too. Guy named Peterson, real sleazy character. He's been following you, taking pictures, trying to find dirt. What kind of dirt? Anything they can use. Your work schedule, your apartment, the women you've talked to, your financial situation. They're building a counter-narrative that you're an obsessive stalker who's harassing their client. Sure enough, by Wednesday we received Sarah's response to our emergency motion. Her lawyer had painted me as a vindictive ex-husband who had hired criminal associates to stalk and harass a vulnerable single mother. They claimed the drug allegations were fabricated, that the photos were staged, and that my obsessive behavior proved I was mentally unstable and dangerous. But they'd made a crucial mistake. In their eagerness to attack my character, they'd forgotten to address the police reports. Sarah's criminal history wasn't something I'd fabricated, was public record, documented by law enforcement, and impossible to explain away. Tom filed our counter-response the next day, and it was devastating. We included Emma's statements about the sleepy medicine, detailed timelines showing when Sarah's erratic behavior coincided with her drug purchases, and medical records showing Emma's weight loss and signs of neglect during Sarah's custody periods. The most powerful piece of evidence was something Carlos had discovered almost by accident. Sarah's phone records showed dozens of calls to known drug dealers, often in the middle of the night, often followed immediately by gas station transactions in the same neighborhoods where she'd been photographed buying drugs. Phone records don't lie, Tom explained. She can claim the photos are staged, but she can't explain why she was calling these people dozens of times. We also requested an immediate custody evaluation by a court-appointed social worker. Sarah's lawyer tried to block it, which only made her look more guilty. When someone is fighting to prevent an investigation into their parenting, it raises obvious questions about what they're trying to hide. The social worker, Janet Hughes, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen every kind of family dysfunction imaginable. She spent an hour with Emma during what was supposed to be a routine visit, and what she discovered was heartbreaking. Emma had been trained to give specific answers about her life with Sarah. When asked if Mommy took good care of her, Emma recited what sounded like a rehearsed speech about healthy meals and bedtime stories. But when Janet asked open-ended questions, the truth came out. Sometimes Mommy forgets to make dinner, Emma told Janet, and sometimes she falls asleep standing up. Her eyes get really small, and she talks really slowly. Emma also described being left alone in cars, being told to lie to adults about her mother's activities, and being promised treats if she kept secrets about the sleepy medicine. Janet's preliminary report was scathing. She noted signs of emotional manipulation, physical neglect, and exposure to dangerous situations. She recommended immediate suspension of Sarah's unsupervised visitation pending a full investigation. But the most important recommendation was for mandatory drug testing. Sarah's lawyer fought it, claiming it was invasive and unnecessary. But the judge ordered both parents to submit to random testing within 48 hours. I passed my test. I'd never used illegal drugs in my life. Sarah, however, requested a postponement, claiming she was sick. Then she requested another postponement, claiming her lawyer needed more time to review the testing procedures. After the third postponement request, the judge had had enough. Ms. Martinez will submit to drug testing by 5 p.m. tomorrow, or I will issue a bench warrant for her arrest. That night, Sarah called me for the first time since our divorce proceedings had begun. She was crying, her voice slurred and desperate. Michael, please, we can work this out. You don't understand what you're doing to Emma. What I'm doing to Emma. Sarah, you've been taking her on drug runs. You've been using cocaine in gas station bathrooms while she waits in the car. It's not what it looks like. I can explain everything, but we both knew there was no explanation that would make any of this acceptable. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern was clear, and Emma's safety was at stake. The next day, Sarah failed to appear for her drug test. The hospital bracelet was too big for Emma's tiny wrist, the white plastic sliding up and down her arm as she lay in the pediatric bed, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. The call had come at 2 a.m. Emma was in the emergency room at Children's Hospital, and I was listed as her emergency contact. I'd broken every speed limit getting there, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Car accident, drug overdose, violence, when I burst through the ER doors. still wearing my work clothes from the late shift I'd been pulling. I found Emma connected to an IV, dehydrated and malnourished to the point where her body had started shutting down. Mr. Thompson, the doctor, was young, probably not much older than Sarah, but her eyes held the kind of professional concern that made my stomach drop. "I'm Dr. Patel. Emma is stable now, but I need to ask you some questions about her living situation." The story came out in pieces. Sarah had been on a 3-day bender, leaving Emma alone in the apartment with nothing but crackers and tap water. When Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor, hadn't seen Emma playing outside for several days, she'd used her spare key to check on them. She'd found Emma barely conscious on the couch, crying for her daddy, while Sarah was passed out in the bedroom surrounded by drug paraphernalia. The child was severely dehydrated, Dr. Patel explained. She also shows signs of prolonged neglect, poor hygiene, untreated dental issues, and what appears to be chronic malnutrition. How long has she been living primarily with her mother? 8 months, I said, and the words felt like an admission of failure. I'd been fighting the legal battle while my daughter was slowly starving. Mrs. Patterson had called 911 when she couldn't wake Sarah, and the paramedics had found a scene that would haunt me forever. Emma, too weak to stand, trying to wake her unconscious mother. Empty bottles of prescription medications scattered across the coffee table. No food in the refrigerator except a carton of spoiled milk and some moldy bread. "Where's Mommy?" Emma asked when she saw me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mommy's getting help, sweetheart. The important thing is that you're safe now." But Emma wasn't safe, and we both knew it. Even though Sarah had been arrested at the scene finally, officially, with charges that couldn't be plea bargained away, the system still had to run its course. Social services had been called, but until the court made a permanent custody decision, Emma was technically still in state care. That's when Emma broke down completely. The tough little girl who had been protecting her mother's secrets, who had been trying to take care of herself when the adults in her life failed her, finally crumbled under the weight of everything she'd been carrying. I tried to wake her up. "Daddy," Emma sobbed into my shoulder. I tried and tried, but she wouldn't open her eyes, and I was so hungry, but there was no food, and I didn't know how to call you. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. My daughter had been trapped in a nightmare, and I'd been focused on building a legal case instead of finding a way to get her out immediately. I'd been playing by the rules while Emma suffered. "I kept the crackers under my bed," Emma continued, her words muffled against my shirt. "Mommy forgot to buy food, but I saved crackers from school lunch, and I drank water from the bathroom sink when Mommy was sleeping." A 4-year-old child had been rationing food and hiding supplies to survive. The image of Emma hoarding crackers under her bed, trying to make them last while her mother was unconscious from drugs, would haunt me for the rest of my life. Dr. Patel pulled me aside while a nurse was checking Emma's for Mr. Thompson. "I have to ask, did you have any idea the situation was this severe?" I suspected something was wrong. I hired a private investigator. I documented everything I could. I filed motions with the court, but nobody would listen. Everyone kept saying that mothers don't lose custody unless there's proof of immediate danger. "Well, now there's proof," she said grimly. "Emma's medical records will show clear evidence of neglect. The police found enough drugs in that apartment to charge your ex-wife with intent to distribute, and your daughter is going to need therapy to deal with the trauma of what she's experienced." The social worker arrived while Emma was sleeping, exhausted from crying and from the ordeal her small body had endured. Janet Hughes looked older than she had during our previous meetings, worn down by seeing too many children in situations like this. "Michael, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Your concerns were valid, and we should have acted sooner. Apologies don't help Emma." "No, they don't. But this does. I'm recommending immediate emergency custody be awarded to you, with no visitation rights for Sarah until she completes a residential treatment program and demonstrates sustained sobriety." It was what I'd been fighting for all along, but getting it this way felt like a hollow victory. Emma was safe, but she was also traumatized. She'd been through experiences no child should endure, and all the court orders in the world couldn't undo that damage. When Emma woke up, she looked around the hospital room with confusion and fear. "Are you going to leave me here, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart. I'm taking you home with me. You're going to stay with Daddy from now on." For the first time in months, Emma smiled a real smile, not the careful, performance smile she'd learned to wear for her mother's social media posts. "Really? Forever? Really? Forever?" The hospital bracelet stayed on Emma's wrist for weeks after we left, even after it was medically unnecessary. She said it reminded her that someone had taken care of her when she was sick, that adults had finally noticed she needed help, that her daddy had come to get her when she called for him. It was the worst and best day of my life, the day I almost lost Emma forever, and the day I finally got her back. My work schedule became evidence of transformation rather than inadequacy. Where Sarah's lawyer had once argued that my long hours proved I couldn't properly care for Emma, now those same hours demonstrated my commitment to providing stability and security for my daughter. The schedule I'd taped to my refrigerator told the story of a man rebuilding his life around a child's needs. Emma had been living with me for 6 weeks, while Sarah sat in county jail, unable to make bail on charges that now included child endangerment, possession with intent to distribute, and violation of probation. The formal custody hearing was scheduled for the following month, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt confident about the outcome. Tom Martinez had warned me not to get overconfident. Courts don't like to permanently terminate parental rights. Even in cases like this, Sarah's lawyer is going to argue that addiction is a disease, that she deserves a chance at rehabilitation, that Emma needs her mother. But the evidence against Sarah was overwhelming now. The hospital records showing Emma's malnutrition and dehydration, the police reports from the apartment raid, the drug test results that showed multiple controlled substances in Sarah's system, the social worker's report documenting signs of long-term neglect. More importantly, Emma was thriving. In my care, she'd gained weight, her color had improved, and she'd started sleeping through the night without the nightmares that had plagued her first few weeks with me. Dr. Peterson, the child psychologist Emma was seeing, had documented remarkable improvement in her emotional state and behavior. Emma feels safe now, Dr. Peterson had written in her report to the court. She's exhibiting normal childhood behaviors, playing, laughing, asking questions, exploring her environment. The hypervigilance and anxiety she displayed initially have decreased significantly. The support from my community had been overwhelming. My construction crew had rallied around Emma and me, with guys who barely knew me, offering to babysit, bringing groceries, helping me child-proof my apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez, my landlord, had offered to let us move into the main house's spare room so Emma could have her own bedroom. By foreman, Bill Jenkins, had written a character reference letter that made me choke up when I read it. Michael Thompson is the kind of man who shows up early, works late, and never complains. But more than that, he's the kind of father who puts his daughter's needs above everything else, including his own comfort and convenience. Emma is lucky to have him. The pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, no relation to my lawyer, had provided medical records showing Emma's dramatic improvement since coming to live with me. Her weight had increased by 8 pounds, her development had accelerated, and for the first time in months, she was hitting normal milestones for a child her age. Even Emma's daycare providers had noticed the change. Emma used to be withdrawn and anxious, her teacher, Miss Kelly, had written. She would hoard snacks and seemed constantly worried about adult approval. Now she's engaging with other children, participating in activities, and showing the kind of curiosity and joy we expect from a healthy but the most powerful evidence was Emma herself. During her court-ordered interview with the child advocate, she'd been clear about her preferences without any coaching from me. I want to live with Daddy, she'd told the advocate. Daddy makes breakfast every morning and reads me stories at night. Daddy doesn't forget to feed me or leave me alone. The advocate had asked if she missed her mother, and Emma's response had broken my heart. I missed the mommy from before, but that mommy went away, and the new mommy was scary. Sarah's rehabilitation efforts, such as they were, had been court-ordered rather than voluntary. She'd been assigned to a program while in custody, but according to Tom's sources, she'd been resistant to treatment and hadn't shown genuine remorse for the danger she'd put Emma in. She keeps talking about getting Emma back, Tom had told me. After speaking with the prosecutor, she's not focused on getting clean for her own sake or for Emma's well-being. She's focused on winning a battle. That attitude was going to hurt her in court. Judges wanted to see accountability, genuine remorse, and a realistic plan for sustained sobriety. Sarah was offering excuses, blame shifting, and promises she'd already broken multiple times. The week before the hearing, I received an unexpected call from Catherine Walsh, Sarah's expensive lawyer. She wanted to discuss a plea agreement. Sarah would voluntarily give up primary custody in exchange for supervised visitation rights once she completed treatment. Your client has supervised visitation now, Tom pointed out during the conference call. What exactly is she offering that's different from what the court would likely order anyway? She's offering to make this easy, Walsh replied. No contested hearing, no traumatic testimony, no public exposure of private family matters. Mr. Thompson gets what he wants, and Emma doesn't have to endure a courtroom battle. It was tempting. The hearing would be difficult for everyone, especially Emma. Even though she wouldn't have to testify directly, her statements and experiences would be discussed in detail. Every aspect of Sarah's drug use and neglect would be laid out for public record, but something about Walsh's eagerness to avoid a hearing made me suspicious. What's the catch? I asked. No catch. My client recognizes that she needs help, and she wants what's best for Emma. After the call, Tom and I discussed the offer. It's not a bad deal. Michael, you'd get primary custody, child support, and decision-making authority. Sarah would have a path back to regular visitation if she gets clean and stays clean. And if she doesn't get clean, then nothing changes. The supervised visitation continues indefinitely. But I thought about Emma, about everything she'd been through, about the months of fear and hunger and confusion she'd endured while Sarah maintained her perfect facade. A plea deal felt like letting Sarah off easy, like avoiding accountability. For the damage she'd done, I want the hearing, I told Tom. Emma deserves to have the truth told, officially and completely. And other fathers in my situation deserve to see that the system can work when there's real evidence of neglect. Tom nodded. Then we prepare for battle. Because even with all our evidence, custody hearings are unpredictable. We need to be ready for anything. The false police report arrived at my door on a Tuesday morning, delivered by two officers who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. According to Sarah's sworn statement, I had violated the restraining order she'd secretly filed by showing up at her apartment, threatening her, and attempting to break down her door. "Mr. Thompson, we need you to come with us for questioning," Officer Martinez said, his hand resting casually on his handcuffs. "There's been a complaint filed against you for harassment and violation of a protective order." I stared at the paperwork, my mind racing. This is impossible. Sarah's been in jail for 6 weeks. How could she file a restraining order from jail? She was released on bail 3 days ago, Officer Rodriguez explained. The complaint was filed yesterday. My stomach dropped. Sarah was out of jail, and I hadn't been notified. More importantly, Emma didn't know her mother was free, and the thought of Sarah showing up at the daycare or my apartment sent panic shooting through my veins. "Can I call my lawyer before we go?" "You can call him from the station." The ride to the police station felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Sarah had been planning this waiting until right before the custody hearing to file false charges that would make me look violent and unstable. If I was arrested, even temporarily, it would undermine everything we'd built in Emma's case. At the station, I learned the details of Sarah's accusations. She claimed I had shown up at her apartment at midnight 2 nights ago, pounding on the door and shouting threats about taking Emma away forever. She had a witness say neighbor who supposedly heard the commotion and saw a man matching my description fleeing the scene when police sirens were heard in the distance. The problem with Sarah's story was that I had an ironclad alibi. 2 nights ago I'd been working a late shift at a hospital renovation project, surrounded by coworkers and security cameras. The timesheet I'd signed showed me clocking out at 12:47 a.m., and I'd stopped at a 24-hour diner. Afterward, with 3 other guys from my crew, Tom Martinez arrived at the station within an hour, carrying a folder full of documentation that destroyed Sarah's narrative. Security footage from the hospital, showing me on site during the time of the alleged incident. Receipts from the diner, time-stamped at 1:15 a.m. Testimony from my coworkers who'd been with me the entire evening, but the damage was already done. The arrest, even though charges weren't filed, would be part of the public record. Sarah's lawyer could point to it during the custody hearing as evidence of my escalating behavior and pattern of harassment. "This is desperation," Tom explained. "As we left the police station, Sarah knows she's going to lose the custody case, so she's trying to drag you down with her. The false report actually works in our favor. It shows how far she's willing to go to manipulate the system." But Sarah wasn't done. Over the next week, a series of anonymous complaints were filed against me with various agencies. Someone reported me to Child Protective Services, claiming Emma was being neglected and abused in my care. Someone called my employer, suggesting I was using drugs on the job. Someone even reported me to the IRS, claiming I was hiding income to avoid paying child support. Each complaint required time and energy to address. Each investigation, even when it quickly proved baseless, created documentation that Sarah's lawyer could twist into evidence of multiple concerns about my fitness. As a parent, the CPS investigation was particularly stressful. A social worker showed up unannounced at my apartment, demanding to inspect the living conditions and interview Emma privately. The worker, thankfully, was experienced enough to recognize a well-cared-for child when she saw one. "Mr. Thompson, I've seen real neglect, and this isn't it," she told me after spending an hour with Emma. "Your daughter is healthy, happy, and clearly bonded with you. This complaint appears to be motivated by custody disputes rather than genuine concern for the child." But the investigation took 3 days to complete, 3 days during which I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the possibility that the system might remove Emma from the only stable home she'd known in months. Emma sensed my stress, even though I tried to hide it from her. "Are you mad at me, Daddy?" she asked one evening when I was particularly distracted. "No, sweetheart. Daddy's not mad at you. Daddy's just worried about grown-up things. Is Mommy trying to take me away again?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Emma, at 4 years old, understood exactly what was happening. She'd lived through enough chaos and uncertainty to recognize the signs of another battle brewing. "Nobody's going to take you away from me," I promised, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. "You're safe here, and you're staying here." The final blow came when Sarah's investigator submitted a report claiming I'd been dating multiple women and bringing them around. Emma violation of custody agreements that prohibited introducing children to romantic partners without court approval. The truth was that I hadn't dated anyone since the divorce. My entire focus had been on Emma and the custody battle. But the investigator had photographed me having coffee with Maria Santos, the woman I'd met at the courthouse whose advice had helped me hire Carlos Rodriguez. He'd also taken pictures of me talking to Miss Kelly, Emma's daycare teacher, during pickup and drop-off. In the hands of a skilled lawyer, innocent interactions could be made to look inappropriate. 2 conversations with women became evidence of a pattern of irresponsible behavior around Emma. "They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks," Tom warned me. Sarah's lawyer knows these accusations won't hold up under scrutiny, but they might create enough doubt to influence the judge's decision. 3 days before the custody hearing, Sarah herself called me. She'd somehow gotten my new cell phone number, and hearing her voice after months of silence was jarring. "Michael, please, let's work this out before it goes to court. Emma needs her mother." Emma needed her mother when she was starving in that apartment. I replied, "Where were you then?" "I was sick. I'm getting help now. I've been clean for 8 weeks. "You've been in jail for 8 weeks. That's not the same thing as being clean by choice. I know I made mistakes, but I love Emma, and she needs both her parents. Don't do this to her." The manipulation was subtle but familiar, making me responsible for Emma's pain, framing Sarah's consequences as my choices, positioning herself as the victim rather than the cause of our daughter's trauma. "The only thing I'm doing is protecting Emma from further harm," I said. "If you really love her, you'll get clean and stay clean, and maybe someday you can earn back the right to be in her life. You'll regret this, Michael. I'm not going down without a fight." The line went dead, and I realized that despite all the evidence, all the documentation, all the obvious facts about Emma's well-being, this battle was far from over. Sarah was going to fight dirty until the very end, and I needed to be prepared for anything. The drug test results arrived by certified mail on a Friday afternoon, and the numbers told a story that even Sarah's expensive lawyer couldn't spin. Despite 8 weeks in jail and 3 weeks in a court-ordered rehabilitation program, Sarah had tested positive for cocaine, oxycodone, and methamphetamines. She'd been using drugs while out on bail, while preparing for the custody hearing, while claiming to be in recovery. The test showed not just recent use, but levels that indicated chronic, heavy abuse. Sarah wasn't just struggling with addiction, was actively choosing drugs over any chance of rebuilding her relationship with Emma. Tom Martinez called me as soon as he received the results. "Michael, this is over. No judge is going to award custody to someone who's using meth while fighting for their child." But the drug test was just the beginning. That same afternoon, Detective Williams from the Narcotics Division called with news that would change everything. Sarah had been arrested again, this time as part of a larger drug trafficking operation that had been under investigation for months. "Your ex-wife wasn't just using, Mr. Thompson," Detective Williams explained. "She was dealing." We found evidence that she'd been selling prescription drugs to support her own habit, and some of that activity took place while your daughter was present. The investigation had uncovered a network of people who were obtaining prescription drugs through fraud and selling them on the streets. Sarah had been a middle-level dealer, using her legitimate prescription for anxiety medication as a cover for much larger illegal activities. "We have surveillance footage of her conducting sales in parking lots, gas stations, and private residences," the detective continued. "On at least 6 occasions, your daughter was in the car during these transactions." Emma had been an unwitting accomplice to drug trafficking. At 4 years old, she'd been exposed to dangerous criminals, illegal activities, and situations that could have resulted in violence or arrest. The thought of my little girl sitting in a car while her mother sold drugs to strangers made me physically sick. "We also discovered that she'd been using your daughter as cover," Detective Williams added. "Drug dealers are less likely to be suspected when they have a child with them. It's a common tactic, but it puts the children at enormous risk." The federal charges were serious conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, using a minor in the commission of a felony, and multiple counts of drug trafficking. Sarah was looking at a minimum of 5 years in federal prison, possibly much more. But the most damning evidence came from Sarah's own phone records and text messages. Prosecutors had obtained warrants for her electronic communications, and what they found was a detailed record of her drug business. Messages about quantities, prices, meeting locations, and customer preferences. All time-stamped, all admissible in court, all proving that Sarah had been living a double life for years. Some of the messages mentioned Emma directly. "Can't meet until after I drop the kid off." Read one text. Another said, "Bring the girl, looks less suspicious." Sarah had been deliberately using our daughter as camouflage for criminal activity. The final piece of evidence was financial. Federal investigators had traced thousands of dollars in cash, deposits to Sarah's various bank accounts, money that had no legitimate source. She'd been earning more from selling drugs than she ever had from her part-time retail job, and she'd been using that money to fund the lifestyle she'd displayed on social media. The expensive clothes, the dinners out, the apparent financial stability that had made her look like the better parent in court had all been paid for with drug money. Sarah had been financing her custody battle with proceeds from criminal activity that endangered our daughter. Tom received Sarah's lawyer's withdrawal from the case that same afternoon. Catherine Walsh, the high-powered attorney who had seemed so confident months earlier, was abandoning ship. Sarah's new lawyer was a public defender who specialized in criminal cases, not family law. "This isn't a custody battle anymore," Tom explained. "This is a criminal case where custody is a side issue. Sarah's going to prison, and the only question is for how long." The revelation changed everything about our approaching court date. Instead of arguing about who would be the better parent, we were now dealing with a situation where one parent was a federal criminal defendant, The judge would have to consider not just Emma's immediate welfare, but her long-term safety and stability. Sarah's criminal activities also explained some of Emma's behaviors that had puzzled me. Her ability to lie convincingly when questioned about her mother's activities. Her hypervigilance around strangers. Her knowledge of things should know, like how to spot police cars from a distance and what to do if adults started acting nervous around her. She trained Emma to be a lookout. Dr. Peterson, Emma's therapist, told me after reviewing the police reports. Children in these situations often develop survival skills that look like maturity but are actually trauma responses. The night before the custody hearing, I sat Emma down for a conversation I'd been dreading. She needed to know that her mother wouldn't be coming to court, that the legal process was going to result in her staying with me permanently, and that Sarah would be going away for a long time. Emma, you know how Mommy was doing things that weren't safe for you? She nodded solemnly. The sleepy medicine and the scary people. Well, the police found out about those things, and Mommy has to go to a special place where people learn how to make better choices. Like time out. Sort of like time out, but much longer. And while she's gone, you're going to stay here with me. Emma was quiet for a long time, processing this information with the seriousness of a child who had learned to expect disappointment from adults. Will she get better? Emma finally asked. I hope so, sweetheart, but even if she does get better, it's going to take a very long time. That's okay, Emma said, leaning against my shoulder. I like living here with you. You don't forget to make breakfast. Such a simple statement, but it captured everything about the difference between Sarah's chaotic, dangerous world and the stable home I was trying to build. I didn't forget to make breakfast. I didn't leave Emma alone with strangers. I didn't expose her to criminal activity or use her as a prop for illegal schemes. The custody hearing was now a formality, but it was still important. Emma deserved to have the record show exactly what had happened, why Sarah had lost custody, and what protections were in place to ensure her continued safety. Tomorrow, a judge would finally see the truth about Sarah's perfect motherhood. Judge Patricia Hensley's gavel rested on the bench like a symbol of justice, finally within reach. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look stark and official. Sarah sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by her overwhelmed public defender and a federal marshal. The woman who had once laughed in my face about never getting full custody now looked hollow, defeated, and very much like the criminal she'd become. Mr. Thompson, Judge Hensley began, reviewing the massive file spread before her. I've read the evidence submitted by both parties, the police reports, the federal charges, and the social workers' recommendations. Before I make my ruling, I want to hear directly from you about what you're seeking and why. I stood, my hands shaking slightly despite months of preparation for this moment. Your Honor, I'm seeking full legal and physical custody of my daughter Emma, with supervised visitation for her mother only after she completes court-ordered treatment and demonstrates sustained sobriety. And why do you believe this is in Emma's best interest? The question I'd been preparing for since this nightmare began. Because Emma deserves a parent who puts her safety above everything else. She deserves consistent meals, a stable home, and protection from dangerous situations. She deserves to be a child, not a prop in criminal activity or social media posts. Judge Hensley turned to Sarah's public defender. Does your client wish to contest Mr. Thompson's petition for custody? The lawyer, a young man who looked overwhelmed by the federal charges and family court implications, shook his head. No, Your Honor. Given the circumstances and pending federal charges, my client acknowledges that Mr. Thompson should have primary custody, but Judge Hensley wasn't satisfied with a simple concession. She'd clearly studied this case carefully, and she wanted the record to reflect the full scope of what had happened. Ms. Martinez, I want to hear from you directly. Do you understand that you exposed your 4-year-old daughter to drug trafficking? That you used her as cover for illegal activities? And that you left her alone and malnourished while you pursued criminal enterprises? Sarah stood slowly, her orange jumpsuit rustling in the silent courtroom. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that your actions constituted criminal child endangerment and that you prioritized drug use over your daughter's most basic needs? Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that regardless of any treatment you may receive, you will need to prove sustained sobriety and demonstrate genuine accountability before you can ever be trusted? With unsupervised access to Emma again, Sarah's composure finally cracked. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as the full weight of her choices hit her. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. Judge Hensley then did something unexpected. She asked to review Emma's statements privately, reading through Dr. Peterson's notes and the child advocate's reports with careful attention to detail. I want the record to reflect, Judge Hensley said finally, that this court has reviewed extensive evidence of neglect, endangerment, and criminal activity by the child's mother. Emma Thompson was found severely malnourished and dehydrated after being left alone for days while her mother was incapacitated by drug use. She was regularly exposed to dangerous individuals and illegal activities. She was trained to lie to adults and keep secrets about criminal behavior. The judge's voice grew stronger, more emphatic. This court also notes that since living with her father, Emma has shown remarkable improvement in her physical health, emotional well-being, and developmental progress. She has gained weight, demonstrates normal childhood behaviors, and expresses a clear preference for remaining in her father's care. The formal ruling took less than 5 minutes. Full legal and physical custody to me. Child support payments from Sarah once she was released from federal prison. No unsupervised visitation until Sarah completed residential treatment and demonstrated 1 year of sustained sobriety. Even then, visits would be supervised and could be terminated if Emma showed signs of distress. But Judge Hensley wasn't finished. She had something to say that went beyond the legal formalities. Mr. Thompson, this court recognizes that you fought for your daughter, despite a system that initially seemed stacked against you. You documented concerns, hired professionals, and persisted even when authorities were slow to respond. Your advocacy likely prevented Emma from suffering even greater harm. She turned to Sarah, her expression stern but not unsympathetic. Ms. Martinez, addiction is a disease, but your choices while addicted were criminal. You had opportunities to seek help, to prioritize your daughter's safety, to make different decisions. You chose drugs over your child repeatedly. If you want any chance of rebuilding a relationship with Emma, you must first learn to value her well-being above your own desires. As the gavel came down, officially ending the custody battle that had consumed my life for nearly a year, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Emma was safe and legally protected, sadness that it had taken such extreme circumstances to get here, anger that the system had required Emma to be hospitalized before taking action, but mostly, I felt hope. Hope that Emma would heal from the trauma she'd experienced. Hope that I could be the father she deserved. Hope that we could build a life together based on stability, safety, and unconditional love. Sarah was led away in handcuffs immediately after the hearing, off to face federal charges that would likely keep her incarcerated for years. She looked back once as the marshals escorted her out, and for just a moment, I saw not the manipulative criminal who had endangered our daughter, but the woman I'd once loved, the mother who had brought Emma into the world. Daddy, Emma had asked me the night before, will Mommy ever be the good mommy again? I'd told her that people could change, that recovery was possible, but that it would take a very long time and that our job was to focus on building our own happy life together. As I left the courthouse that day, I realized that Emma and I had both been given a second chance. The question now was what we would do with it. The official custody papers felt heavier than they should have. Thick legal documents that represented Emma's safety and our future together. I kept them in a fireproof safe in my bedroom closet, but I'd made copies to keep in my truck, at work, and with Emma's daycare provider. After everything we'd been through, I wasn't taking any chances. Full legal and physical custody awarded to Michael James Thompson. The papers read, followed by pages of specific provisions that protected Emma from any future attempts by Sarah to disrupt our lives. Sarah's visitation rights were conditional, supervised, and could be revoked if she showed any signs of relapse or if Emma demonstrated distress. The day after the hearing, I did something I'd been afraid to do for months. I started planning for our real future instead of just surviving. Day to day, Emma needed a bedroom of her own, a yard to play in, and the kind of stability that came from knowing we wouldn't have to move or fight or hide anymore. Mrs. Rodriguez had kept her promise about the spare room in her main house, but I wanted more for Emma than just a larger space in someone else's home. I wanted us to have our own place, where Emma could paint her walls whatever color she wanted and where her friends could come over without me worrying about disturbing the landlord. My credit had improved during the custody battle, partly because I'd been so focused on legal bills that I'd been living like among no unnecessary expenses. No impulse purchases, no entertainment budget beyond library books and park visits with Emma. The down payment for a small house was within reach. If I continued working overtime and saved aggressively. Emma had opinions about what our house should look like. A red door, she announced one evening while we looked at real estate listings on my laptop, and a big kitchen where we can make cookies, and a backyard for a dog. A dog hadn't been part of my plan, but seeing Emma's excitement about normal childhood dreams, pets and cookies and friends coming over made me realize how much she'd missed during the chaos of the past year. What kind of dog? I asked. A nice dog. A dog that doesn't run away or get lost or hurt people. Even her dog preferences reflected the trauma she'd experienced. Emma wanted predictability, safety, and loyalty, the same things I'd been trying to provide as her father. The house we eventually found was a small, 2-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood full of families with young children. It needed work. The kitchen cabinets were from the 1970s. The bathroom tile was cracked, and the backyard was mostly dirt, but it was structurally sound and priced within my budget. It's perfect, Daddy, Emma said when we walked through it the first time. She ran from room to room, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, claiming the smaller bedroom as her own and already planning where her toys would go. The mortgage application process was nerve-wracking. Every form asked about recent legal proceedings, employment, stability, and major life changes. I had to explain the custody battle, provide court documents, and submit to additional background checks. But my work history was solid, my income was steady, and the recent legal victory actually worked in my favor, showed that I'd been deemed fit to care for a child by the family court system. Moving day was chaotic in the best possible way. My construction crew showed up with trucks and tools, treating the move like a weekend project that required the whole team. They helped me paint Emma's room, the soft pink she'd chosen, installed new light fixtures, and even built her a platform in the backyard oak tree. This is what family looks like, Bill Jenkins told me as we stood in the backyard watching Emma direct the treehouse construction like a tiny foreman. Not just blood relatives, but people who show up when you need them. Emma's first night in her own bedroom was emotional for both of us. She'd been sleeping on the pull-out couch in my studio apartment for so long that having her own space felt almost strange. I found her standing in her doorway at bedtime, looking uncertain. "It's really mine?" she asked. "I don't have to share it or give it back. It's really yours, sweetheart, forever. Can you stay until I fall asleep?" I sat in the chair we'd placed next to her bed, a rocking chair my grandmother had used when I was small, and watched Emma settle into her new environment. She'd arranged her stuffed animals carefully on the shelves, hung her drawings on the walls, and placed her favorite books within easy reach. "Daddy, are we safe here?" "We're safe here, Emma. This is our home, and nobody can take me away. Nobody can take you away. The judge said so, and I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again." She fell asleep holding my hand, and I sat there for a long time afterward, watching her breathe and thinking about how far we'd come. A year ago, I'd been a weekend dad living in a studio apartment, fighting a legal system that seemed determined to keep me marginalized in my daughter's life. Now, I was a full-time father with legal custody, a stable home, and a daughter who was finally healing from the trauma she'd endured. The victory felt complete when Emma's pediatrician cleared her for normal activities without restrictions. She'd gained enough weight to be within normal ranges for her age. Her development had caught up to appropriate milestones, and the anxiety symptoms that had worried Dr. Peterson were largely resolved. "Emma is thriving," Dr. Martinez told me during her 6-month checkup. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. She's a different child than the one I first examined after the hospital incident." That night, Emma and I celebrated with ice cream sundaes in our own kitchen, sitting at our own table, in our own house. It was a small celebration, but it represented everything we'd fought for: safety, stability, and the simple joy of being together without fear of separation. "Daddy, I think we're going to be happy here," Emma said. Chocolate sauce smeared across her cheek. "I think you're right, sweetheart. I think we're going to be very happy." Emma's school report card arrived on a Friday afternoon, and the transformation documented in those simple letter grades told the story of a child reclaiming her childhood. Where 6 months earlier she'd been struggling with basic kindergarten skills, distracted by anxiety and hunger, now she was excelling in reading, showing creativity in art projects, and participating enthusiastically in classroom activities. "Emma is a joy to have in class," her teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had written. "She's curious, kind to other children, and has shown remarkable growth this semester. Her confidence has blossomed, and she's becoming a natural leader among her peers." The report card was more than an academic assessment. It was evidence that we'd made the right choices. That stability and safety had allowed Emma's natural intelligence and personality to emerge. She was no longer the hypervigilant child who hoarded snacks and worried about adult approval. She was becoming the carefree, creative kid she was meant to be. Our routine had settled into a comfortable rhythm: breakfast together every morning, with Emma helping me pack her lunch and telling me about her plans for the day. After-school snacks at the kitchen table while she did homework and told me about her friends. Evening walks with our new dog, a gentle golden retriever mix we'd adopted from the local shelter and named Buddy. Buddy had been Emma's idea, and the adoption process had become an unexpected lesson in responsibility and commitment. Emma had to prove she could take care of another living creature by helping with dog training classes, learning about proper nutrition, and understanding that pets needed consistent care and attention. "Daddy, Buddy depends on me," Emma had explained seriously while filling his water bowl. "Just like I depended on you when Mommy was sick." The comparison was heartbreaking and profound. Emma understood, in her 6-year-old way, that taking care of someone vulnerable was both a privilege and a responsibility. She was learning to be trustworthy by having something trust her completely. Dr. Peterson had reduced Emma's therapy sessions from weekly to monthly, noting that Emma had developed healthy coping mechanisms and was processing her trauma in age-appropriate ways. The nightmares had stopped, the anxiety around food had resolved, and Emma was building normal childhood relationships with friends and teachers. "Emma talks about the past differently now," Dr. Peterson explained during one of our sessions. "She's not defending her mother's behavior or taking responsibility for adult problems. She's able to say that her mother made bad choices that hurt people, including Emma herself." This shift in perspective had been gradual but crucial. Early in our custody battle, Emma had still been protective of Sarah, making excuses for her behavior and blaming herself for their problems. Now she could acknowledge that adults were responsible for their own choices and that children deserved to be safe regardless of what was happening in their parents' lives. The most significant healing came when Emma decided she wanted to write a letter to her mother. Sarah had been transferred to a federal prison facility 3 states away, serving a 5-year sentence for drug trafficking charges. She'd written to Emma twice, letters that I'd read first and determined were appropriate for a child to receive basic expressions of love and regret, without manipulation or inappropriate requests. "I want to tell Mommy about our house and Buddy and my new school," Emma said, "but I also want to tell her that I'm not sad anymore." We worked on the letter together, with Emma dictating and me helping with spelling and grammar. The final version was simple but powerful. "Dear Mommy, I hope you are getting better where you are. I live with Daddy now in our own house. I have my own bedroom and a dog named Buddy. I am in 1st grade and I like reading. I am not scared anymore and I eat breakfast every day. I love you, but I like living here. Love, Emma." The letter said everything that needed to be said, that Emma was safe, thriving, and had moved forward with her life. It offered love without false hope, forgiveness without absolution, and closure without cruelty. My own healing had been more complicated. The anger I'd carried toward Sarah, toward the system that had nearly failed Emma, toward myself for not recognizing the signs sooner, that anger had to be processed and released before I could move forward completely. I'd started attending a support group for single fathers, men who'd fought similar battles or were dealing with their own custody challenges. Hearing their stories helped me understand that our experience, while extreme, wasn't unique. The family court system was imperfect. Addiction affected families across all demographics, and determined fathers could overcome seemingly impossible odds when they refused to give up. "The key is focusing on the future instead of relitigating the past," said James, a father whose ex-wife had struggled with gambling addiction. "You can't change what happened, but you can control what happens next." What happened next, for Emma and me, was building a life based on consistency, honesty, and mutual respect. Emma learned that she could trust me to keep my promises, to be present when she needed me, and to prioritize her well-being above everything else. I learned that being a single father wasn't about being perfect, it was about being reliable, patient, and willing to grow alongside my daughter. We established traditions that belonged only to us. Saturday morning pancakes in shapes that Emma requested: stars, hearts, or her current favorite animal. Sunday afternoon adventures to local parks, museums, or hiking trails. Bedtime stories where Emma created the plot and I provided the voices. 4 different characters. The house itself became a reflection of our new life together. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and hallway walls. Family photos showed just the 2 of us, plus Buddy, in various stages of home improvement projects and small adventures. The treehouse in the backyard became Emma's reading nook, where she'd spend hours with books and her imagination. "Daddy, I'm happy," Emma announced one evening while we were planting flowers in the front yard. The statement was simple, matter-of-fact, and absolutely transformative. "I'm happy to." "Sweetheart, good. Because I think we're really good at being a family." She was right. We were good at being a family, not the family I'd originally planned, not the traditional structure I'd grown up expecting, but a strong, loving, resilient unit of 2 people who'd survived trauma together and chosen healing over bitterness. Emma was thriving, and so was I. We'd built something beautiful from the wreckage of our old life, and every day brought new evidence that we were exactly where we belonged. The Father's Day card Emma made me this year hangs framed above my desk, her 6-year-old handwriting spelling out words that mean more to me than any legal document ever could. "To the best daddy in the world, thank you for never giving up on me. I love you more than all the stars. Love, Emma." Below her message, she'd drawn our house, complete with Buddy in the yard and both of us smiling in the front window. It's the kind of simple, heartfelt gift that captures everything important about our journey together: the love, the safety, the home we've built from determination and hope. 2 years have passed since that final custody hearing, and Emma is now a confident 2nd grader who plays soccer, takes piano lessons, and has strong opinions about everything from bedtime stories to what we should plant in our vegetable garden. She's grown 4 inches, lost a tooth, and developed the kind of fearless curiosity that comes from knowing you're unconditionally loved and protected. The trauma of her early years hasn't disappeared entirely. She still occasionally has questions about why her mother made the choices she did, and she sometimes needs extra reassurance when faced with new situations. But those challenges are manageable now, addressed with therapy, patience, and the kind of open communication that allows Emma to process her experiences without shame or confusion. Sarah was released from federal prison last month after serving 3 years of her 5-year sentence. She's in a halfway house now, participating in a supervised re-entry program and working at a laundromat for minimum wage. According to the latest reports from her probation officer, she's maintained sobriety for 18 months and has expressed interest in eventually pursuing supervised visitation with Emma. The court has made it clear that any contact between Sarah and Emma will be heavily regulated and dependent on Emma's comfort level. At 7 years old, Emma has the right to decide whether she wants to see her mother, and so far, she's shown little interest in rebuilding that relationship. "Maybe when I'm older," Emma told Dr. Peterson recently. "Right now, I just want to be a kid and not worry about grown-up problems. Her wisdom continues to amaze me. Emma has learned to protect her own emotional well-being while still leaving the door open for future healing. She doesn't carry anger toward her mother, but she also doesn't feel obligated to prioritize Sarah's feelings over her own stability. The experience has taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I've discovered that the family court system, while imperfect, can work when fathers are persistent, documented, and willing to fight for their children's safety. I've learned that addiction is a disease that affects entire families, but that recovery and healing are possible for everyone involved, even when relationships can't be fully restored. Most importantly, I've learned that being a single father isn't a consolation prize or a temporary arrangement until something better comes along. It's a complete, fulfilling way to build a family. And Emma and I have created something beautiful together that neither of us would trade for any other arrangement. My advice to other fathers facing similar battles is simple but hard-earned. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Don't accept the first answer if it doesn't feel right. Find professionals who will listen to your concerns and take them seriously. Most importantly, never give up fighting for your children, even when the system seems stacked against you. Construction crew guys still tease me about being Mr. Mom, but they've also seen how Emma and I have flourished together. They've watched her grow from a scared, malnourished 4-year-old into a confident, healthy second grader who knows exactly how much she's loved. They've seen that families come in all shapes and sizes, and that what matters isn't the structure, but the love, commitment, and stability within it. Emma and I have talked about the possibility of our family growing in the future, not through reconciliation with Sarah, but through new relationships that might develop naturally over time. I've started dating occasionally, always with Emma's knowledge and input, always with clear boundaries about protecting our primary relationship. Daddy, if you find someone who wants to be part of our family, they have to love Buddy too, Emma informed me recently, and they have to know that you're my daddy first. Her conditions are non-negotiable, and any woman who might eventually become part of our lives will have to understand that Emma's well-being comes before everything else. That's not a burden, it's the foundation of healthy relationships and responsible parenting. Looking back on the darkest days of our custody battle, when I was sleeping on a pull-out couch and wondering if I'd ever get more than weekend visits with my daughter, I couldn't have imagined how complete our life would become. Emma is thriving academically, socially, and emotionally. Our home is filled with laughter, creativity, and the kind of peaceful routine that allows a child to feel secure enough to take healthy risks and grow into her own person. The torn family portrait that used to remind me of what we'd lost has been replaced by dozens of new photos showing what we've built together. Emma and me at her soccer games, working in the garden, reading bedtime stories, teaching Buddy new tricks, and simply enjoying the ordinary moments that make up a happy childhood. Sarah's prediction that I'd never get full custody turned out to be wrong in every possible way. I didn't just get legal custody, I got the privilege of watching my daughter heal, grow, and flourish in an environment where her safety and happiness are the top priorities every single day. Emma is sleeping peacefully in her own bed, in her own room, in our own house, surrounded by people and pets who love her unconditionally. Buddy is curled up on the rug beside her bed, standing guard over the little girl who rescued him from the shelter just as he rescued her from loneliness. Tomorrow, Emma and I will wake up in our safe, stable home and continue building the life we've created together, one breakfast, one bedtime story, one small adventure at a time. We'll continue proving that love, combined with determination and unwavering commitment to a child's well-being, really can overcome any obstacle. And if another father is reading this while sitting in a studio apartment, wondering if he'll ever be more than a weekend visitor in his child's life, I want him to know, don't give up. Fight for your kids. Document everything. Trust your instincts. The system can work, families can heal, and children can thrive when they're surrounded by adults who refuse to stop advocating for their safety and happiness. Emma was right in her Father's Day card. I never gave up on her. But the truth is, she never gave up on me either. Together, we built something stronger than either of us could have created alone. A family defined not by its struggles, but by its resilience, love, and hope for the future.